Hello everyone. I've decided to make a series of lectures on principles and methods for developing and validating scales. Before I continue, I'm inviting everyone to please subscribe to my channel. 95% of the people who are watching these videos are not subscribed, so I would really appreciate it if you can help the channel, if you can help me by subscribing, especially if at some point in time the channel was able to help you in your projects or in your academic requirements. And thank you very much for subscribing. When we talk about scales, these are essentially instruments that we use for research, instruments that are intended to measure particular constructs. In our discipline, we make use of scales that measures different psychological constructs. And sometimes there are situations wherein there is a need for us to develop our own set of scales. I understand that this topic is quite interesting and might be beneficial for students who may be enrolled in some test construction course, or it also might be useful for some researchers or budding researchers who are currently doing some project that requires them to develop their own scales. Okay, so the goal is to develop something like this, a simple scale wherein there is a set of instructions. There are a few items, and the items are typically declarative statements. And based on the declarative statements as well as the set of instructions, there is a response set for which the test taker will use to rate a specific item, either rating in terms of agreement or rating in terms of how frequent they engage in the behavior that is described in the item. And beyond the physical makeup of the scale, we also understand that this should be supported by some evidence of structural validity. In this case, this is a perceived teacher attributional feedback scale. So theoretically, students receive feedback from their teachers, and the feedback of their teachers might contain messages with regard to how teachers attribute their successes or failures. And the scale suggests that there are two general content, or there are two general attributions. Either teachers attribute their success and failures because of their ability or the lack of ability, or the teachers attribute their successes and failures due to effort or the lack of effort. And as we can see here, structurally, ability seems to be measured by 4 items, and effort attribution seems to be measured by 3 items. So that essentially is our goal for those who want to develop a scale. So as I've said, the scope is quite broad, so I've decided to make this kind of a 6-part lecture series. So for today, we will be discussing part 1, which is measuring constructs. We will talk about the importance of measurement in scales, and we'll talk briefly about latent and manifest variables. Part 2 is characteristics of a good scale or a good instrument. So we will talk about reliability and validity. Part 3 is about generating an item pool. So there I will talk about tips on how to write good items, things to do, things not to include. And then part 4, I'm going to talk about different possible response formats. And then part 5 will be about content validation and pilot testing. And then part 6 will be about some statistical analysis to further construct validity, talking about exploratory and confirmatory factor analysis. So at least that's the plan for now, and hopefully I can carry out that plan. Anyway, for today, we will be focusing on an introduction to scale development. So let's begin. I suppose because the intention of the scale is to measure something, I guess it's important to first talk about the idea of, or the concept of, measurement. There are many definitions of what measurement is. I kind of have my personal definition of what measurement is, but I suppose traditionally or conventionally, when we talk about measurement, the first thing that comes to mind is the idea of quantifying something, the idea of representing something with some kind of a numerical value, and that numerical value has some kind of magnitude, such that we can compare one individual from another individual and say that, one is greater than or less than the other with regard to a specific variable or with regard to a specific entity that has been measured. No? And essentially, the things that we quantify are things that vary from person to person. No? Less in this person, more in that person. And the things that vary are what we refer to as variables, no, as the term suggests. No, there are many variables in a given individual. We can think of, weight. Different people have different weights. Age. Different people have different ages. Level of satisfaction in whatever. Self-efficacy, the belief that one can successfully do something. People have different levels of beliefs. Some people believe in themselves so much, some people do not believe themselves at all. No? So these things differ or vary from one person to another, making them variables. And while for some, we have standard ways of quantifying them or representing their quantity, like for example, weight, we have a weighing scale. Age, we have a calendar. Universally, we have an accepted system of determining what age you are in. But there are some other things, some abstract things, such as satisfaction or self-efficacy, that we don't have universal measures for or universal systems of measurement for. And that might require us to devise specialized instruments, which we refer to as scales. No? And a scale is essentially a kind of measurement because it's a tool that ultimately generates a numerical value, and that numerical value supposedly is an estimate of what is being measured. But a broader conceptualization of measurement basically is it's the act of capturing variation. People vary in weight, so measuring weight is essentially the act of capturing the variation in weight. Some people have more self-efficacy, some people have less self-efficacy, and so when we measure self-efficacy, it's an act of capturing the variation of self-efficacy. And to me, I like that definition better, the act of capturing variation. And this becomes very important because scales are often used in research. Because when we conceptualize a simple model in research, for example, we said or we hypothesized that variable A predicts variable B, we really can't analyze the relationship of variable A and variable B. But we can do so in an indirect manner with the aid of measurement. And how do we do that? Instead of talking about variable A and variable B, we need things to represent their variation. And that's where a specific scale that supposedly measures variable A, which we call as measure A, represents the variation of variable A in the sample. And another scale, we call it measure B, that supposedly captures the variation in variable B in your sample. And statistically, it is these two that we analyze the co-variation of, the relationship of. And if we find that statistically measure A is related to measure B, and what does that mean? If they have positive relationship, that means to say that as measurement A increase, we also observe an increase in measurement B. As measurement A decrease, we also observe a decrease in measurement B. These two being related means that the variation in A seem to coincide with the variation in measure B. And statistically, if this is proven, the relationship between measure A and measure B is the one that is used as evidence for the supposed or for the hypothesized relationship between variable A and variable B. So ultimately, you really cannot test the relationship between variable A and variable B. At best, you can do that indirectly by testing the relationship between measure A and measure B. And that's why scales that are intended to capture the variation of variables that we are interested in our own research is very important. And because of that, we want our measurement instruments, we want our scales to be as precise as possible. Valid measures, accurate scales are a necessary condition for valid research. Haphazard measurement means that the data is faulty, and from faulty data, there is a sequence of untoward consequences. Faulty data leads to faulty interpretation. Faulty data leads to faulty interpretation. Faulty interpretation leads to faulty conclusions. And ultimately, faulty conclusions might lead to faulty applications. Now, what are we exactly measuring, specifically in psychology and in social science? When we develop scales, what do the scales we develop measure? Generally, we refer to them as hypothetical constructs, or simply constructs. Hypothetical constructs are variables, meaning to say they exist, they differ from one person to another. However, they're abstract. They cannot be seen. They're intangible. And take note, whether or not they exist is a matter of assumption. They exist as far as the fact that we assume that they exist. But because there is no direct observation, or because these things cannot be directly observed, our belief that they exist rests on the assumption that they do exist. And some people actually believe that they don't exist. Now, if I ask you, does love exist? Some people say, yes, love exists. But then again, I will not be surprised if there are people who would say that love does not exist, that the things that we are experiencing are merely a byproduct of some chemical reaction in the brain. If I ask you, does intelligence exist? Well, first of all, intelligence is a very complicated construct. I'm not exactly sure if we have successfully pinned down and specified and identified what intelligence is. I think there is still some degree of debate in terms of what might be considered as intelligent. And then there's the question of, does it exist? Most of us would say, yes, it does exist. But then again, I will not be surprised if some people would say, no, there's no such thing as intelligence. But why do we assume they exist, now, even if we don't see them? Why are we so confident that things like love, traits, openness, agreeableness, neuroticism, anxiety, depression, intelligence, pro-social behavior, altruism, self-efficacy, why do we seem confident that they exist? Partly the explanation is because, let's say for example, intelligence. How do we know intelligence exists? To me, the argument that can be made is that when we look at people around us, in terms of how they behave, we see variation. Variation in behavior. So much so that you can see that one person is behaving quote-unquote intelligently, smartly, shrewdly, while another person might be consistently behaving in a rather unintelligent manner. It is this variation that probably makes us think that there must be something that that first person have that the other person may have but probably less of. But what is it that makes this person behave intelligently and which makes this person behave in an unintelligent manner? And this variation, or the observed variation, probably is the impetus for us to think that there must be something within individuals that determines this variation. And that thing is the hypothetical construct. What's that hypothetical construct? Well, we label them. We label them as intelligence. When we look at other people and their behavior and the things that they say, we will notice that some behaviors seem to have a strong belief that they can succeed by the words that they say, by the actions that they do. They seem to have no hesitation in volunteering themselves. But then again, when we look at other people, some people seem to shy away from the moment. Based on what they say, they seem to have less confidence in their abilities. The things that they say indicates that they don't believe that they will succeed. No? So why is there variation in the things that people say, in the things that people do, pertaining to some belief about being successful at something? And that variation made people think that, there must be something in individuals that having such makes them more confident, and having less of it makes them less confident in their abilities. And then the label follows. And what is that label? Self-efficacy. Ultimately, even if we're not sure that these constructs exist, we assume that they exist because when we look around, we see variation, we see differences in behaviors. And that is kind of the basis of the justification for developing self-report scales. The idea is that whatever is the state of the construct within me can influence my outward behavior. And an example of an outward behavior is rating or answering the response set in a scale. As you listen now, I want to ask everyone, are you hungry? If you're hungry, raise your hand. If you're very, very hungry, raise your hand high up there. If your hunger is, you're kind of hungry but not so much, just a little bit. And for those who are really not hungry, you just ate, then don't raise your hand. If you are truthful, our behaviors or the behaviors of watching this video would have been different. And what triggered the variation? Some of you raised their hand way up, some of you a little bit here, some of you a little bit here, some of you didn't raise their hand. Though those variations supposedly have been influenced by the construct within you. And what is that construct? What did they ask you about? Hunger. So that's kind of the analogy, for what we do in scales. So essentially, a measurement scales is an instrument that contains a sample of behaviors. In here, so these items, these are samples of behaviors. I know steps on how to effectively increase my motivation to review. I understand when to best use particular motivation enhancing strategies, so forth and so on. So all of these items, all of these statements describing behavior or describing thought or cognition are regarded as sample behaviors. Measurement scales are a collection of items that when responded to, whether you agree or disagree, whether you do it never, rarely, sometimes, often, almost always, and of course these ratings have a corresponding numerical value, and when you combine them, they generate a score or a composite score. And this score supposedly represents the construct that is being measured, or is an estimate of the construct that is being measured. Going back to this example, if I ask you, when you experience successes and failures at school, sometimes your teachers give an explanation, give an attribution for your successes. Do your teachers say this, and these are the items, all of which are pertaining to attributions related to ability? Or do your teachers say this, which are statements describing teachers who attribute failures and successes with effort? And the way that we respond to each of these items should be informed by the construct that is within, which is the perceived ability attributional feedback. And the way we respond to these items theoretically should be influenced by the construct. And what is the construct? The perceived effort attributional feedback from teachers, perceived by students. So, the classical measurement model assumes that the individual items are effect indicators of the underlying construct. So, these are indicators. And you will notice the arrowhead. No? It suggests that the construct influences the way we respond to these items. And that our responses here is an effect of the construct. And that's why they're called effect indicators. These items are referred to as manifest variables. Okay, so these items, these are manifest variables. These are manifest variables. By the way, you might be wondering what this is. These are errors. This suggests that while these items and the way we respond to them are influenced by the construct, individually, it can also be influenced by some random factor. What random factor? It could be anything. You're rushing, you're hungry, it's hot, your mood, the lighting condition in the room. We also understand that the way we respond to each of the items can also be partly, although hopefully minimally, be influenced by something else other than the construct. So those are errors. The underlying construct is referred to as the latent variable. So if these are manifest variables, the constructs are what we call as the latent variables. Latent meaning to say that they're in the foreground. We don't see them. They're not visible. Versus manifest, which is more visible. They're in the forefront. A scale developed to measure a latent variable is intended to estimate the actual magnitude or the true score at the time of the measurement for each person. So this is a very important construct. So theoretically, within us is a true score. If you're measuring self-efficacy, the idea is that within me, there is a true level of, let's say, for example, academic self-efficacy. If you're measuring perceived ability, attributional feedback, within the individual, there is a true score level of that construct. If you're measuring perceived effort, attributional feedback within an individual, there is a true score. But we don't know what this true score is. We don't know what the true score is. The idea is that the scale that measures the latent variables, our ratings here, which is summed into a score, this score is an estimate of the true score. Same thing with the other construct. So here is an example. By the way, for those of you who are watching this, the example might be familiar if you have read the book by De Villiers. So basically, my presentation is based off of that book. So in here, the hypothetical construct that we are measuring is parents' aspirations for children's achievement. Now, are you parents? Do you have children? Do you aspire for their achievement? And what are possible behavior indicators of a parent who has strong aspiration for their children's achievement? So these are supposedly a sample of those behaviors that we as parents may or may not agree with. If we agree with this, then this might be indicative of our high aspirations. If we don't agree with them, then that might be indicative of having less aspirations for our children's achievement. So let me know, for those of you who have children, do you agree or disagree with these statements? My child's achievement determine my own success. I will do almost anything to ensure my child's success. No sacrifice is too great if it helps my child achieve success. My child's accomplishments are more important to me than just about anything else I can think of. The way we answer this, or our ratings for this, are the manifest variables that represents the latent variable, or that estimates the true score of the latent variable. It says here, given the opportunity to express how strongly they agree with each of the items, parents' true score for the underlying assumption for their children should influence their response. So if you're a parent, your true score for your aspiration for your children's achievement should influence whether you agree or disagree, or the level of agreement or the level of disagreement with these items. If your true score for your aspiration for your children's achievement is very high, then you should all strongly agree with each of these items. The score obtained on the item is caused by the strength and quality of the latent variable for that person at that particular time. And with the emphasis in the word caused. And if that is the case, if the latent variable causes the manifest variable, then there should be a strong correlation between the item value and the true score of the latent value. If my true score is, let's say for example, although we can never know what the true score is, but let's say for example, my true score is out of 100, 94, then my composite score, or the score in the scales, again, assuming that the scale is 1 to 100, should be close to that, should be a good estimate of that. If it's 94, then the other one should be, I don't know, 92, 93, 94, 95, 96, 97. But whatever it is, it should be close to the true score. However, there is a problem there because we can never know what the true score is. The true score is another one of these hypothetical things. We can never know the true score. But it doesn't stop us from mathematically estimating the relationship between the true score and the scale score. And that will be our topic for the next part of the series when we talk about validity and reliability. So this concludes the first part of the series of lectures on scale development. I hope that you learned something, and if you did, please watch out for the next part of the series. Again, I'm inviting you to like and subscribe. Please support me in my channel so that I can create more content for everyone. Thank you, and I'll see you around.